The other day I was at the Dollar General. I was sitting in a car like I am now, and much of my environment, as you can hear, is quiet. My silence was interrupted abruptly, because the policewoman had to lead a funeral procession. She led the procession with sirens on, driving to a busy intersection and stopping it. The sirens made such a loud noise that it alerted me before she even got to the point of me seeing where the noise was coming from. I want to tell you, many times God will put you in a position where you can't see it, but you've heard it. And the sign of evidence that you are just as called and just as anointed, that you're just as prepared and just as dedicated, the sign that God still has his hand of grace all on you and that he has not forgotten about you, is that you can hear it, but you ain't seen it. And I'm talking to somebody today to know that I may have heard many things, but I know everything that I heard is going to come to pass, because if God said it, he's God big enough just to make sure that I see everything that I said. I'm telling somebody today that my silence was brought to an abrupt stop because a funeral procession led by a police officer with her sirens on stopped in the middle of a busy intersection. We're talking about downtown Nashville traffic. Talking about right after school. We're talking about you got kids playing. You're talking about you got people at the car wash. You're talking about you got folk trying to do their shopping. I'm talking about you got everybody going everywhere who got everything important to do, and she brought it to an abrupt stop. I came to tell you today that it does not matter what anybody else has going on around you, how much they've been playing you, what they said about you, how they feel towards you, or what they think is going to happen to you. When God gets ready to bring you to your next assignment, what he'll do is he'll cause stuff to stop moving around you. But before we could see her, we heard her. And the acclamation of the evidence of the environment, that there's sometimes that God had to bring it to a stop because you didn't know how to turn the red lights of confusion off in your life. God told me, Jeremiah, when I can't get your attention by the light, I'll get your attention by making everything stop. And I wonder today, how many people found themselves in a indicting place? Because many times the places God brings you to is a place that's been abruptly stopped for you. And it's not that you're unable to see it, but many times you'll hear about the stop before it is that you see what God is stopping around you. You ever notice how people just cut you with no excuse? They cut you with no reason. They'll fire you and not even tell you why your job here or this assignment is over with, why it's finished, and you're standing there looking like, God, what did I do? But that's not the people attacking you. That's just God preparing the environment around you. When you are ready to grow, oftentimes God has to break up the ground around you. So make notion of the seed today, because a funeral is just the outward expression of the inward process that a seed goes through. The Bible says, I want you not to worry about today nor tomorrow. Because if God can take care of the birds of the field and the lilies of the valley, let me tell you today that the lily starts as a seed on the ground. And oftentimes it'll look like you're buried, but you got to begin to tell every word of doubt over your tomorrow that I'm not buried, and I'll prove it, because where you thought I died, I grew out of it. Oftentimes they'll put the seed in the ground. If you're unsure, if you're not certain, if all you've seen is just things die, at the place where God is planting you, he's burying you where you were meant to flourish. I know that the funeral was led by the procession of the family, but the family had to follow the policeman. Now the policeman had the sirens, and the family could follow with no friction in traffic because they were led by the sirens. And I need to tell you on today that if you allow God to lead you, what will happen is he'll sound the alarm to people who weren't unsure about you. He'll sound the alarm to people who thought that they had you figured out. He'll sound the alarm for people who declared death and defeat all over you. What God is going to do for you in this season is not correct them. He's just sounding the alarm around them. And you ought to be thankful. You ought to be grateful. You ought to be glad in your faith and affirmed by your word that the reason I know it's going to work out. The reason I'm not really concerned about how God sounds siren. Oftentimes God has to separate you and put you in a dark space for you to be able to identify that it's in his grace of being alone that I'm able to see and be purposed for my next, because sometimes it's people connected to you now that's limiting God from blessing you, and God's no infringement, so he's not going to touch them. He just starts agitating and irritating the environment. He'll make the environment toxic so that the people who you loved, who were connected to you, who didn't even like you, will get irritated and leave you. That's when God can bless you. Don't look at it as it's an attack. Jesus said, even after 3 days, moping and crying, after 3 days, he declared dead, walked over, looked at bad instead. After 3 days, 3 nights. You ever been in that space? 3 days and 3 nights. I'm talking about a long time. It seems like in your mind, but it's only been 3 days and 3 nights. You ever looked at a problem and didn't know how it was going to work out? I'm talking about going into the weekend, knowing the rent's due on Monday, and you ain't make enough and it's Friday, and you don't work none this weekend. I'm talking about laying down on Thursday, knowing that the illness that runs through their body could mean that tomorrow's their last day. You got to get up and smile and face work and put on a happy face for the family on Monday. I'm talking about 3 days and 3 nights. I'm talking about couldn't figure it out all weekend. I had time and I still don't know what to do with it. 3 days and 3 nights. The Bible says that early Sunday morning, nobody was out there waiting for me. There's no cheerleading squad, no band, no anticipation, no excitement for him getting up from what could have killed you and them and people around too. Nobody was there to clap for you. He told me to tell you, oftentimes when the seed gets ready to sprout, nobody sees it, but it does it anyway. And I just need to tell you, grow anyway, in confirmation but affirmation word to you. Though they are shading on you and can't really see you, God told me to tell you, grow anyway, thrive anyway, survive anyway. God told me to tell you, excel anyway. God told me to tell you, graduate anyway. God told me to tell you, get married anyway. God told me to tell you, propose anyway. God told me to tell you, though people don't like you, I ain't gonna support you. I won't be there to talk about your favor, your faith, or your future. God told me to tell you that you've got to grow, thrive, survive, and excel anyway. That's what he said. Jeremiah. Yes, God. Tell the people, I said, here we go. What you want me to tell them? Grow anyway.